100, not like 90%, like 100%. I think that bad cultures are generally the result of bad things that have happened in the past or bad modes of thought that have prevailed over time.
That is true.
So while I agree with you that when you look at white America, it's silly to say that the majority of white Americans are actively trying to prevent you from getting to where you want to be. I'm East Indian, and I have definitely experienced some racism, but I never felt as though it keeps Indians from succeeding. So I do think there's a cultural component that supersedes the color of your skin. But I also think that it's naive to say that it just so happens that the same minority groups that have been historically oppressed happen to have cultures that are less conducive to success. I believe that environment can create culture. Can you acknowledge the historical reasonings that led to these so-called unsuccessful cultures and not put blame on these minority groups?
So he's basically saying cultures that have a history of being historically oppressed happen to have cultures that do not lead to success. And he's basically trying to tie a connection between the culture of, I'm assuming he's talking about the black community, and historical oppression. The problem I have with this statement is that even if you look at, I'll look at the white community in terms of historical oppression. You do realize majority of whites in America do not get passed down any economic benefit from their parents in the slightest. A large portion of whites in America, Caucasian Americans, actually grew up on poverty. They grew up on welfare. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because when you think of historic oppression, I personally think of which group of persons in the country have the best chance of success. And what is success? You want a house, you want a car, be able to send your kids to college, do all these things, go on vacation twice a year, whatever. What does that require? It requires time and it requires money. So if Caucasian Americans do not have more time, everyone gets the same amount of time on earth. So it's not that. It would have to be they have more money, naturally have more money. That's not the case from their parents. Their parents aren't passing down generational wealth. 99% of their families are not. And you're talking about oppression. I brought up the white community where everyone blames them for everything. So if they don't get passed down wealth, how are you blaming them for another culture's oppression? But let's continue.
I know that in your heart, I don't think you're a racist person. But in my opinion, to blame people for their failure, for their cultural failures, without taking into consideration historical, the history in general, conceals a lack of empathy and sort of hints at racism.
Okay, so I'll fight back on the last point that there's anything to do with empathy or racism here, but I fully agree with you. Like 100, not like 90%, like 100%. I think that bad cultures are generally the result of bad things that have happened in the past or bad modes of thought that have prevailed over time. So, for example,
that is true.
There's a great book by Thomas Sowell called Black Rednecks and White Liberals, and that book essentially suggests that a lot of the pathologies that exist about single motherhood, for example, in the black community, or high rates of violence, are actually outgrowths of a slave and post-slave culture that was imposed by a white society that didn't bother with policing, that didn't care about inculcating morals or virtues in slaves. Obviously, they actually actively fought against it because they didn't want that to happen. And so there was an active fight from against assimilation by white people, and that created an underground culture that's really bad, and that exists in parts of white America too. It exists in Appalachia. So yes, I think bad cultures have nothing to do with race. I don't think that just because this is why I'm saying I don't know why it borders on racism to say the cultures are bad. Like some.
Yeah, and this is why I disagree with him, because his premise was on the border of race specifically. I do think past experiences do obviously lead to bad cultures. You can't deny that. But when you say racism, I think of modern. It leads to modernism too, because racism wouldn't be anything without people imposing it today. So you're blaming a group of people today. Who are you blaming in that? You have to be talking about the white community. That's what everyone talks about. That's the big thing. That's what's hot on the block. But yeah, let's continue.
Cultures are bad, some cultures are good, and that has nothing to do with race. Charles Murray wrote an entire book called Coming Apart about pathologies in white communities that are really destructive. So bad cultures do arise very often from historical circumstances, including historical discrimination. What I say is that today, there's nothing preventing an individual from superseding the culture in which you grew up and making good decisions. that in a free country, somebody's going to have to break this chain. Somebody's going to have to break this cycle. And so, am I going to? I don't care if you want to say that the pathologies that exist in the black community, black inner city community of high rates of single motherhood and violence, for example, or lack of institutional wealth, that is a result of historic racism. I'm fine with you saying that. I don't have any problem with that. I'm not talking about historical racism when I talk about white privilege. I'm talking about right now the idea that there's a superstructure of rules and laws that are preventing you from succeeding, or a culture that is trying to keep you down. I don't think that's the case. So the question becomes, if you are here, let's say that on average, the culture in white America, or with regard to single motherhood, to take an example, is here, right? Because there's less single motherhood in the white community than the black community. And in the black community, it's here because it's 70% single motherhood rate, and the white community is 40%. Okay, so the question is, before, thanks to racism and thanks to discrimination, there was a cap on the black community that was here, and they couldn't get past it. Okay, now the ceiling's been removed. So what do you as an individual black person do to change your life?
But that's facts, bro. Why are you blaming white people for what's happening in inner city black communities? That don't even make sense. White people have absolutely nothing to do with what's happening in inner city black communities. Let's flip this logic. Let's say there was an inner city white community and they had a large rate of crime and they had a large rate of single motherhood. Let's just flip the race. There's a white community that has a large rate of crime and a large rate of single motherhood. And people from that community started blaming black people. We will look at them like they're insane. We will literally look at them like they have mental illness, like they have something is wrong with them. We will look at them like they need help. And I'm not saying that as a judgment or as to knock them down. I would really think that they're crazy. But why isn't it the same when the roles are reversed? We're talking about 2024, mind you. I'm not talking about historical racism. I'm not talking about historical privilege. I'm talking about 2024, the same year where immigrants will come in and get rich. The same year where we have 17-year-olds, 18-year-old geniuses starting businesses getting rich. This is what I'm talking about. We're not talking about the 1950s, the 1960s. I'm not talking about that time. And the reason it's so relevant is because we are in the land of the free and we are in the land of opportunity where you can accomplish anything you want. But we aren't even getting to the start line. We aren't even having successful families. We aren't gaining marriages. We aren't even living a life outside of crime. That's it. We just don't commit crime. But let's finish this video out.
And I don't think it's helpful. And in fact, I think it's actually quite hurtful to spend an enormous amount of time talking about the legacy of discrimination and racism instead of talking about what can you do right now to fix your problem. You know, this is a general issue that I have in all of my relationships. When my wife comes to me and she says, there's a problem in my life, before we even have the conversation, I say to her, is this a listening conversation or is this a you want me to fix it conversation? And I think that when it comes to politics, there should be far fewer listening conversations, like I want you to tell me about all the crap that's happened to you, because I don't care. I mean, I care, but it doesn't. But now the question is, what you going to do? Right? That's a much more important conversation, because we only have 5 minutes together. Is that 5 minutes going to be spent on all the terrible things that happened, which I fully agree with, that I would have fought if I were there, but I wasn't? Right? Are we going to spend 5 minutes talking about all the terrible things that happened to blacks and Jews and gays and women and Hispanics in the United States? Or are we going to talk about right now what you can do to succeed? Because I don't think that the rules are holding you back.
That's facts, man. That's facts. And people who refuse to believe that, they are the ones who are actually holding you back. I stand on that. I'm black. Obviously, I'm physically black. But I'm pursuing a master's degree in electrical engineering, and I might pursue a PhD in it. I might. It just depends how it goes. But what is holding me back? No, nothing about race is holding me back. And the thing that really triggers me about that is I know amazing people from every single race. Every single race. I know people who have risked it all just to help me. Every race. White people who have helped me put their careers or put themselves on a limb to look out for me. Asian people who've done the same. Indian people who have done the same. Native American people who have done the same. Latino people who have done the same. Black people who have done the same. Every race of people, we are a melting pot of cultures and of races and of identities. And the longer we hold on to what race is holding this race back or what gender is holding this person back, we are hurting ourselves, man. But if you have any suggestions for me, comment down below. It's LFR Jojo, and I'll see you guys in the next video.